missing?
Well, I think, the income verification process is out of line. I think that, basically what you're doing is they're just submitting a document. By the time it actually gets approved before it's actually verified. It's a huge taxpayer burden. I mean, I personally cannot agree with something that, allows us to falsify the system and, within the system and actually claim benefits that shouldn't be claimed.
Thanks.
Would
you like to?
I would agree with Joe on that. I mean, verification of citizenship, verification of identification, I mean, that's a common sense thing. I don't know how people can debate that. Joe and I agree on that. It's not debatable. The real problem we've got right now is, and Joe's right, is some of the cottage industries that have formed in our country are for creating false identification, birth certificates, social security numbers, social security cards. And they're happening because of a failed or non-existent immigration policy from the federal government. We have to keep coming back to that. So the states try to figure it out. Arizona tried to figure it out, and then the courts get involved and say they can't because it's a federal policy. So I would agree with Joe that we absolutely need verification for anybody that wants benefits. But we have a different problem, and that's the uncompensated care pool continues to grow because we're a compassionate people, and when people walk through the emergency room that are not citizens, we treat them.
Okay. Joe, anything else? No?
I'm all set.
All right, we'll move on to the next question, and this is about county government. Ta-da! In a recent article in the Boston Herald, actually in September of 2010, the Herald stated that county government is an unnecessary middleman. Should Plymouth County retain the present county form of government? And we'll start with Joe. Joe.
I'd like to think so, but when the sheriff's department had been taken over by the state, I think that was a big chunk of the county government that has basically been removed, and that was a big part of what the county does. I do want to tell you that this is a topic that I'd like to read up again on some more and be able to provide you a better answer and at a later date.
Okay, thanks. Tom?
Fran, I've had the opportunity to live in other parts of the country where county government is the solution to the financial challenges that municipalities have. Patty and I lived in Maryland in a place called Harford County in Bel Air, Maryland. Nobody wanted to know what town you were from. They wanted to know what county you're from. And there was a very efficient use of county government. I would argue that we have an efficient use of county government here in Plymouth County. It costs about $3 per person per year for our county government, and that includes the prison system before it went off to the state. That's pretty efficient. Nobody can argue at those kinds of figures. We've got our county treasurer who's tried to be out in front, Tom O'Brien, on issues and vision about how we can make county government take some of the financial burden off municipal governments. But we've got 3 commissioners that have behaved terribly, who don't want to fix it. They want to abolish it. And I have said to them personally, and I've said to them in the newspapers, if they don't want to be county commissioners, and if they don't want to lead, and if they don't have a vision for using county government to help support municipal governments, then they should resign and move on and let 3 other commissioners take over that have vision, who have courage, who know how to behave in a civil manner, and who can get things done, because the communities, the towns, are thirsting for a plan to take some of the pressure off each individual town. County government could be the model for doing that, but it's not going to happen under such poor leadership of those 3 county commissioners.
All right. Joe, did you want to respond?
Not at this time.
Okay. All right, great. Well, then that's going to bring me to the last of my questions, and actually this question is in 3 parts, and I'm sure everybody's been wondering, when is she going to ask this? I want to talk about the ballot questions that are coming up and where you stand on them. So we're going to start first, and we'll start with Tom. Do you agree with the repeal of the sales tax on alcohol?
No, I don't, Fran.
Okay.
I voted against the increase in all taxes in the last session. But now that it's in place, I think, as Joe pointed out in his introduction, we need stability in our tax policy. We don't need to keep changing it back and forth and back and forth. We need to do long-term planning. It's in place. When times improve, when the economic situation stabilizes, I'd be the first one to want to repeal it, but not right now. It should be noted that 100% of that money that's collected for the alcohol tax is earmarked, it's dedicated, it's committed, not to the general fund, but to substance abuse, to alcohol abuse, to health care. So if we take that, if we repeal that sales tax, then we'll have difficulty funding those programs. It should be further noted that the sales tax and the excise tax is the same as 46 other states in the country. There is an excise tax and a sales tax. We weren't the first to create this sales tax. Keep one other thing in mind. We exempt clothing, prescription drugs, and food from our sales tax because they are requirements, they are necessities. I don't think anybody can argue that alcohol is a necessity. So why should it be exempt?
Okay. Joe, do you agree with the repeal of the state of the tax on alcohol?
Do I agree with the repeal of it?
Mm-hmm.
I do. I think that it should be repealed. It is a double tax. We are collecting excise tax off of it. You know, in an opportunity for us to create a better environment for our small liquor store owners who need to be able to compete, you know, and this falls more in line with the North Shore along the New Hampshire border, but it goes right across the state when you figure, because there's people from down here that are vacationing up in New Hampshire, and when on their way back, they're buying alcohol before they come back. We need to make sure that we protect our business owners first. We need to make sure that the taxes that we're implementing are fair, and what we've done is we've done ourselves a disservice by taxing our stores when the ones to the north of the border are getting away scot-free and being able to continue to bring in revenue.
All right, we're going to go, I'm just going to go right to the next one, all right, because our time is drawing close. Joe, this one goes to you. Should Massachusetts voters repeal Chapter 40B? We'll start with you.
Yes, and I'll tell you why. And it's a simple answer, but since we've enacted 40B, we've slipped to 49th on the housing affordability list out of 50 states. I think the fact that we are not affordable proves that the law is not working for us. You know, originally when this question was posed, I thought about it, and I thought that maybe reform was the best way through it, and just saying, you know, let's change the law a little bit. But I think it's time we scrap the law and start over.
Okay. Tom, should we repeal 40B?
Yes, repeal 40B. It's lived its useful life. It was passed in 1969. It created more than $9 billion in economic activity. But Joe's right, it has stopped producing affordable homes. Why have an affordable housing law where we have to compromise our local zoning when it doesn't create affordable housing?
Okay.
We need to rewrite the law and make it so that it generates affordable homes for the next generation.
Thank you. And so, Tom, I'll come to you with the third one. Should we roll the sales tax back to 3%? Yes or no?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
It'll be the most disastrous measure this Commonwealth has ever taken. And as education is coming forth on this issue, the polls have now flipped, and people are opposed to it. Let's get the facts on the table. This question will decrease the state budget by $2.5 billion, effective January 1st. In addition to the $1.5 billion structural deficit that we face as we head into the year, that's $4 billion. Half of our budget is non-discretionary. So $14 billion of our $28 billion budget is non-discretionary. So we're talking about reducing the remaining $14 billion by $4 billion. Michael Widmer from the Mass Taxpayers Foundation, a very conservative think tank, has said that without question, he called his article falling off the cliff. Without exception, there'll be across-the-board cuts of 30%, including local aid. For the town of Kingston, my friends, that's $1.4 million, effective January 1st. Now, people say, why do you keep talking about police, fire, teachers, and EMS? 80% of our budget here in Kingston is teachers, police, fire, and EMS. So where do we think those cuts are going to come from? They're going to come from those categories. It's not a scare tactic. I deal in numbers. That's my training. That's my professional background. I deal with reality. That is the reality. I would rather question 3 fail, even if it meant I didn't get elected.
Okay, thank you. Joe, should we roll back the sales tax to 3%?
Well, I'm going to start by saying that I think that 5% would be more pragmatic, and I've always said that, but that's not the question at hand. And I think that if the voters vote for it, it sends a strong message to Beacon Hill that we've been taxed enough already. And without these people who are voting for it, we're looking at saying, everyone else saying that we're okay with 6 1/4. We're okay with that. And, we've already had it on the table where we've tried to bring that sales tax back to 5%, didn't make it. I think we need a clear message sent to Beacon Hill saying that, listen, enough's enough. And you know what? If it does pass, and I am elected, I will stand behind the people who voted for it, and I'll say, you know what? We need to enact real reform to pay for this. We can't put local aid first every single time, and it's always the same answer with every one of the elected officials right now. Well, it's going to be 30% of cuts across the board. First thing that they mention is local aid. I have not yet heard you mention, well, let's look at the pension system, let's look at the healthcare system, let's look at any one of these factors that are out there that we could, let's talk about the jobs that, and this is, it's almost comical because really the only jobs that government has created are the jobs that Deval Patrick created. What about those jobs? What about the guy that he gave a $175,000 job to immediately after he was elected? I mean, these are all things that add up, and not one thing is going to pay for it, but there's plenty of fat in the budget that we could cut, and some of these could be these pet projects rather than going after local aid.
Tom, you have 1 minute to rebut.
I wish I had 1 hour. Sound bites are great, but we're getting into the last 2 weeks of the election. We have to get into the substance. Just for the record, I voted against the increase from 5% to 6.25. I thought it was the wrong time. Number 2, Joe talks about he thinks it should be at 5%, and he'll work to get it back there after it goes down to 3%. Yet he's taken a no new tax pledge, so he can't participate in getting it back to 5%. To me, that's like asking you folks to do the dirty work as he sits back, because he can't vote to increase it back to 5%. Second, I'm using Joe's numbers. He said pension reform will save $100 million. Past question 3, we have a $4 billion deficit. Pension reform, the biggest element in the Republican plan, is $100 million. The cut is $4 billion. And last, I would say to you that $3 billion, or $2.5 billion, that cut is effective January 1st. Your tax rates are already set, so the cuts have to be to local aid.
Joe,
Yes.
1 minute to rebut.
So, on top of that $100 million, there's other ways that we could cut fat out of the budget. Again, the pet projects that, the $100,000, and I hate to use a Kingston local organization, but the Joint Watershed, or Jones River Watershed Association, every year you've put in an earmark for $100,000, no less than $100,000, and rather than saying, okay, let's cut some firefighters or 2 firefighters, we could say, okay, let's take a year off from that, and let's look at this after we've gotten back to it. And you know what? I have said yes, 5% is more pragmatic, and I am going to stand behind the voters, because if it's the voters' will to vote to bring it back to 3%, I'm going to stand behind the voters, and I'm going to do everything in my power to keep it at that level and to be able to balance the budget. And if it means that I have to go,
You have
Okay.
to stop.
if I have